He is a content creating mastermind. It is Gabe Goodwin on Twitter at Gabe the WP. This guy runs things at Blue Duck Media, as you can tell by his hat, which I'm very excited to learn more about all the projects that he has invested in, some really high profile things. Also has a ton of experience working at Fox Sports and ESPN. A social media savant is Gabe. I'm Bryan Fenley, an anchor at Fox Sports Radio, and I'm on Twitter at Bryan Fenley. Gabe, it's an honor to have you. You have a very busy schedule, and I wanted to start here. When did you first realize that you were really creative and that you'd be pretty good tapping in to that gene, that characteristic of being creative?
Okay. Well, I don't know if when I realized it or if it's necessarily the case, but I will tell you that my parents think that they spotted something creative in me when I was about 4 years old.
Really?
And I came home with a painting I had done, which was basically just a bunch of squiggly lines.
Okay.
If you look at it now, and they still have this painting, if you look at it now, it's just a lot of lines on a page. But I titled it Worms Hanging Upside Down in Jail. And I thought that was like a master stroke of genius. And so I think my parents just always sort of valued thinking differently and coming up with new ideas, and kind of just said like, yeah, that's cool. Try that. My dad was a journalist, is a journalist. And I always liked writing and trying to work in that direction. And so when it came time to get a real job, that's kind of where I ended up. And yeah, I mean, I was around creative people for 10 plus years at ESPN, and I picked up a few tricks.
So, in other words, you're channeling your version of a Jackson Pollock painting as something very, very, very bare bones.
Dude, I didn't want to bore you and your audience with a bunch of, art project stories from my childhood. But the other follow-up to that story, my mom has told many times, including these holidays, is
Yeah.
she took me to, I think it was the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. And she claims I was staring at a Jackson Pollock, mesmerized. And she was like, wow, why is he so into this Jackson Pollock? Maybe my son's a future artist. And then she's like, what do you think? And apparently I looked up at her and I go, Ma, I could do that. And I couldn't, but I think I had like a irrational confidence at a young age that doesn't look so hard. I could try to do that. Obviously Jackson Pollock is brilliant, but splattering paint seemed doable
Yeah.
to a 5-year-old. So yeah.
When you think of the canvas of your career, you mentioned ESPN. How did that opportunity come in your direction when you were first trying to find your niche in the business?
So I got lucky because when I was in college at George Washington University in Washington, D.C., I took a unpaid PA job working like a TV concert. And basically, I lied and said I knew my way around DC. And so they made me a driver for talent. I was driving around a bunch of talent or talent's agents or talent's family, whoever it was. And one of the people I drove around happened to be John Stewart's agent. John was hosting.
Wow.
Really long story made very short. I took a swing at asking him if I could be in touch in the future and send him a resume. I must have done it the right way, because he followed up and said, I'll put your resume on the right pile at the Daily Show. After that, kid, it's all on you. I did get a call for an interview for an internship at the Daily Show that summer. I got the job and I loved it. I was around, this is like pre-Emmy run for John and team. So I was around John Stewart, Stephen Colbert, Steve Carell, Matt Walsh, Ed Helms. All these people were sort of coming in, and I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. Like, how can I not want to work in this? And so a few years later, if you intern at a place like that at the right moment in time, interviews get easier. People assume you know what you're talking about. And so when I got out of college, I got an interview with people who were running a show called Pizza at ESPN. Again, I must have said a few of the right things in a meeting, and boom, I got a PA job at 22 years old in New York City working on a show called Cold Pizza. That became First Take. We moved back to Bristol. I helped launch a show called Sports Nation and worked on a ton of other stuff. But it all started, honestly, just driving John Stewart's agent around.
That is a fascinating story. And you were at ESPN, correct me if I'm wrong, Gabe, but was it 10 years you were there or
almost 11, yeah.
And then your career took you to Fox Sports. And so how did that transition go for you as far as learning how a new company wants their creativity to be shown, and sort of how your role changed as you went to the West Coast?
Yeah, it's a good question, a fair question, and I'm not trying to be a wise ass when I say I'm not sure I did learn that
Stop
for
it.
two for two well no for two reasons. One, I only stayed there about a year and a half, and I didn't totally mesh with them there, and that's a longer story for somebody else's podcast one day. But but that's sort of the wise ass part of the answer. The more helpful part of the answer to younger people who might listen to the show and want to figure out how to do things
Sure.
similar in their career is I got lucky because I was working with the core group of people I had grown with and seen success with at ESPN. So, most people listening probably don't know a lot about me. I mentioned Sports Nation First Take. So in that process, I started working more and more with a group of producers who were responsible for those shows. And our sort of special touch was we were, I think, very good at working with the talent from those shows. So when Fox Sports made the decision to bring Colin Cowherd, Skip Bayless, other talent who had similar skills to work around them, when that became the vision for FS1, it was only natural that I would be one of the people, capable of growing it. And my focus was to grow what we were doing in digital and social. I'd been a TV producer for years. I knew how to work with those talent and make their TV shows good, but my focus was actually making us good on all the other screens. So I did that for a while, and then I left and started my own company about 3 years ago.
Well, let's go right to that new company that, well, it's not new now, but relatively as far as your career is concerned in Blue Duck Media, and having your ability to have your own say on things creatively
Yeah,
and the projects that you're working on. Take us into all that you are working on with this entity.
yeah. Well, it's funny, right? Like I don't have a boss per se because I have my own company, but I now have lots more bosses, right? So like I want to paint both sides of the grass
Sure.
is greener scenario here. Like on the one hand, I don't have a boss with a boss with a boss who you can roll your eyes at and grumble about and say, got to do this stupid thing because the boss's boss said so. So I'm done with that. But which is great, by the way. Like that
Hmm.
was probably the most annoying part about working in a big organization is, somewhere up the food chain, there's someone who you don't think is great and you got to do what they say anyway.
Sure.
I'm done with that. But I have many bosses now because to keep your own little business going, you got to work for a lot of people and you got to please a lot of people, and you can't blame someone else in the marketing department when something goes wrong. It's on me now. So we work with a bunch of different clients. We got to know each other because of some work I was doing with the Athletic, and so while I did have my own company and I could say no whenever I wanted, they could also say, well, we're not paying you any longer. So they were in effect
Sure.
my boss. Now, what we do have the opportunity to do at my company is develop ideas and work on things that we think are cool and creative where there are no bosses yet. Where if we can go find the revenue it takes to make this stuff, um, there isn't anyone telling us no, and so I'm just really getting to that point now, a few years into creating Blue Duck, where we're seeing those opportunities, and so without getting into all the particulars of how the business works, like we're working with good partners to create a show with Trey Wingo. So
Yes.
there's a show out there called Half Forgotten History right now, which is it's essentially just Trey pouring himself a drink and talking NFL legends about some stories that maybe we never knew or kind of forgot along the way. It's a fun watch and listen, and it's just kind of the show Trey and I wanted to make. We don't have a quote unquote boss because we figured out a way to get the right brands involved. We have partners, obviously, who help us sell it, but uh, it's a really cool thing to do to just kind of jump on a Zoom like this with, you know, Trey Wingo, who's just like the best guy there is at this, and Hall of Famers like Emmett Smith. And just my job is basically make sure we hit the beats along the way, but let them do their thing. And like, that's a pretty cool way to get paid.
How did the idea first come about with bringing on Trey Wingo, starting this show that, like you said, is, we talked about this off air, but you just finished your first season or looking to get that second season going, but it's already really had a lot of success.
Yeah. Well, I'm almost entirely, I would credit Trey with this. He and I were friends from ESPN. We were in touch just talking about things he might want to do when he left there. And um, the show that we're making is kind of, the evolution of a few ideas that he had. And I sprinkled a few ideas on top of his ideas, and we got what we got. I mean, but it's basically Trey knew the kind of people he wanted to talk to and the kind of environment he wanted to create. He's a really casual, fun guy to sit and have a drink with. So he figured if he could make a whole show kind of like that, people would watch and listen. And, his hunch was right. So I've really just been helping him enact that vision, which, is mostly what being a producer is. So that the idea comes mostly from Trey in this case.
In most cases, where do you do your best thinking as far as formation of a show, ideas that come to mind?
Yeah. These days, I don't know. I'm searching for that place. I have 3 young kids. I have twins who are about to turn 3 and a third who's about to turn 1. So
Oh my
if
gosh.
you want to just think about what that means, for a month there, I had 3 under 2. I now have 3 under 3.
Mm.
So I don't have a lot of quiet time to think. But for me, yeah, I mean, I go on runs, and that's usually a chance. It's been hard now that we don't commute anywhere. I mean, today I came to my office, but without a commute and a chance to clear your head, it's hard. It's hard to it's hard to put in your calendar. I don't know how much you operate on calendars. I'm addicted to my calendar. It's hard to just put in 90 minutes of like think about stuff.
Yeah.
But I mean, I do it sometimes
Yeah.
because otherwise, how are you going to work it out? I mean, I learned at ESPN from guys, who I work closely with on Sports Nation. Like, you know, you got to borrow, you got to look at what works for other shows, and sort of put your twist on something. You can't invent everything from scratch every time. So for me, the creative process will be sort of figuring out what it's similar to, then layering on sort of the look and tone and sound that we're going for, then sort of tearing it all apart and redoing it all, and then you kind of forget what the inspiration was, and now you just know how to make the show that you sort of made. So I like to think of it as, the way I describe to a lot of people is like, you draw lines, right, that are pretty nicely defined, but then you can throw any paint and color you want in between those lines, but you kind of have to have like a clear shape to paint within, um, or you'll never get anywhere creatively. But the creative stuff comes within those lines, and any color you want goes in there.
How often do you change the shape, look for something new, cutting edge, some ingenuity, where you're taking a risk? You are, because you don't know how it's going to be received.
I wish I got to do that more. Honestly, I mean, that used to be all I did. And I would say, I left ESPN as a fairly young guy, and I probably was a little full of myself and thought, I probably thought, oh, this big company is stuck in its ways and it's holding me back. And I got all these cool creative ideas and they don't want to do any of them. I'm sure I muttered stuff like that as I left there 5 or so years ago. And what I came to realize recently is, no, actually, like, some of the most creative stuff I ever thought of or attempted was there because the stability of the place. And now, listen, they've had a weird few months here, and a lot of good people lost their jobs. So I don't want to overlook that.
Sure.
But for a long, long time, I was lucky to go to a job with a salary, whether I was busy on Monday or Tuesday or not. I was showing up there, and it gave me the opportunity to do what you're talking about, like
Mm.
kind of redefine the lines and sit around with 5 other really, really smart people and just think and draw on whiteboards and build decks and shoot ideas around and act shit out. Like, sorry to
Yeah.
curse, but
Oh no,
like,
you're fine. It's fine. You can do whatever you want.
well, that was the coolest thing about being there, was like, when we would develop shows. I mean, Sports Nation's the one that I had the most fun doing, and the guys I worked with on that are probably the smartest guys in the space that I've come across. Some really good people with First Take too. Um, but the best thing about it was we'd have an idea. Somebody would sort of say, it's kind of like this, it's this, it's sort of like what PTI does, but with this spin on it. And I'm thinking we're going to do it this way and this way and this way. And before we ever took that to Colin Cowherd and Michelle Beadle, who were the hosts at the time, we would just act it out. And we would be in a conference room or somebody's office and just act out what it might look like and find the flaws in it. And it was, it was built on a lot of the foundations of improv comedy. Not that we were hilarious comics, but like the yes and was sort of the mentality we all had. And, you and I would sort of take on Michelle and Colin roles and try to find the flaws in the idea. And, you'd try something, didn't quite work, but I'd sort of build on that. And eventually we'd say, that's it, that works. And then we'd bring that to the people who helped us with the set or the graphics, or we'd bring that to Colin and Michelle. And suddenly you'd have made a TV segment. Some of them lasted for years and years. Some of them were scrapped the very, next time we thought of them. But I think what I'm trying to say is I don't have enough time in my day while running my own little business to think like that and to act like that and to be silly like that. And that's a treat that I think people should not take for granted when they feel like they're on some big corporate team and there's no creativity here. Maybe look at it differently. Maybe that's the most creative place you could possibly be, because there is some sense of security and stability, and there is a whole department to do that other thing. Whereas when you have your own company, like, you're the finance department, you're the marketing department, you're all those things. How much time is there really to be fun and creative? Maybe not as much as there should be. So I don't know. Maybe I'm just like gotten old and reimagined history, but I do think I had it wrong when I was at ESPN, that it was a far more creative place for people in production than I gave it credit for.
Speaking of smart, you have one of your projects is Jeff Schwartz is smarter than you. I see you on that. How fun is that between you and Jeff, having that exchange and then getting that sort of entertaining content out there as well?
That's really fun because Jeff is genuinely like the smartest football guy I know.
So smart.
Yeah. And so we came up with the name of the show because we were like, just try to give it an honest name. So it's called Jeff Schwartz is Smarter Than You, because odds are if you click play, he is, at least on football topics. The show is kind of just what our conversations are like behind the scenes, just made into a format, which I think is usually a good recipe for a show. So I'm usually, the guy who sees everything on Twitter and absorbs what, people are thinking about football. And I represent like the masses of Twitter, and I fire the takes at Jeff, and he usually grumbles and shakes his head and is like, no, that's not how that works. And then he makes us a little smarter about football by kind of correcting our false impression of the game. It's not meant to attack anyone or call anyone an idiot, but every now and then he basically is saying like, so-and-so big name guy who gives takes for a living has this completely wrong. And I think that's kind of a cool niche show for a lot of people who love football.
I believe in Jeff when he says that when they bring like a referee to an NFL broadcast, they bring these people, they need to bring an offensive lineman in to get their perspective, to understand what that's like. I think that would add an added development or element, I should say, to an NFL broadcast. And I know Jeff has talked about that a lot. I think he's got something there. My final question for you, Gabe, is when you span through your career, when was the moment when you took the biggest risk on yourself? You weren't sure what was going to happen, and it ended up paying off very well for you.
Well, I mean, I would like to claim that walking out of ESPN instead of taking a bigger job there was the answer, but I knew where I was headed. I would like to claim that walking out of Fox to go start my own thing was the answer, except I didn't actually know I was going to go start my own thing.
Wow.
So I don't know if I have a really easy answer to that. I'm not trying to dodge it. I think I've done a lot of things that other people might call risky, but have not really felt very risky at the time to me. They felt like the only option that made sense to me. I guess it goes back to where we started. I think the biggest risk I might have taken that I would advise other people to take is go walk up to the person and shake their hand and ask them what they do, how they got into it, learn a lot, and then put yourself out there and say, can I please ask a favor of you? do that instead of going up to them and asking them for a picture or an autograph or whatever else one might do. I mean, I think that might feel like a risk to a lot of people, and I think it's a risk worth taking. So, I think if this show is getting heard and seen by some people younger than us who are still trying to figure out how to get to do a job like the ones we have, yeah, don't approach it like a fan. Approach it like a salesman, and go in there and take the risk and sell yourself.
Because who knows where your career would have been or where it would be without you speaking up with that agent early on, and how that led you to what you've done today. Gabe Goodwin on Twitter at Gabe the WP. I'm Bryan Fenley on Twitter at Bryan Fenley. Gabe, thanks so much, man. I really appreciated your insight. It's awesome to reconnect with you. And I encourage everybody to check out all of his different projects on Blue Duck Media with Trey Wingo and Jeff Schwartz. The list goes on. So many other things that are in the works. And this man right here is who has spearheaded this awesome project entity of Blue Duck Media. Gabe, thanks so much, man.
Yeah, it was awesome being on with you. Thank you so much for having me. It's cool because usually, you ask the talent to come do something like this. So to ask your producer is really fun. It's cool chatting with you. I'm glad you're doing well.